catchphrase.
You're just saying that.
Well, we're in this series called Catchphrase, and if you were with us last weekend, we kicked off this series, and we all use in our everyday rhythm, in our everyday lives, these phrases that have quickly become catchphrases. Phrases like this, let's get together soon. You see, it's a great sentiment when you see someone, and you're like, oh, let's get together soon. But when soon never happens, it becomes a catchphrase, right? Did you use it this week? Did you find yourself saying, oh, let's get coffee soon? And then you find yourself going, right now in this moment, oh, I forgot to text that person. Or maybe it's the catchphrase, I was just going to call you 3 weeks later. Just going to. Today. In the church world, we have catchphrases that we use. One of the most famous ones is, I'm going to pray for you. And then we forget. Not because we're evil-spirited, not because we're maniacal, just because we get busy. And right now, some of you are thinking to yourself, oh, that's right, I did tell that one person yesterday I was going to pray for them, I forgot. It's okay, right now, just start praying for them. It's cool, you can listen to me and pray at the same time. It's amazing, God's good like that, right? They're catchphrases, and at Tri-County, we pray that these main phrases we use, and we're looking at 4 of them, that they're so great, and they're so foundational, and they're catchy, and they're emotive, but our prayer is that they never become a catchphrase. We pray that they never become those phrases that people use, but there's not really action associated with them. So last week we kicked off and we looked at this first phrase. It's Jesus is the subject. And I desperately tried not to put a hierarchy to all 4 of these phrases we're looking at, but as we jumped into that, this one has to rise to number 1. I think the next 3, the one we'll look at today and the next 2 weeks, I think the next 3, they're kind of underneath this umbrella, but this one has to be number 1. And last weekend we gave people an opportunity to make Jesus the subject of their lives. And kind of leading into last weekend, we as a team were just praying about, just people that they'll take the spiritual step to make Jesus the subject of their lives. And so last week, we gave people an opportunity at all of our campuses to accept Jesus as their Lord and Savior, leader, forgiver, and friend. And it was so exciting. At our Clearfield campus, we had 1 person accept Christ for the very first time. And at our downtown campus, we had 4 people accept Christ for the very first time. And that's just something we should always celebrate, right? That's yeah, right? Honestly, all the music is great and lights is great and all the website things are great and all the things we do is great, but this is everything. I got done last week and I was just on fire. 5 people made Jesus the subject of their life. It's all about this. I know here on the Hill campus, we had countless conversations after every service. I know me personally. People really taking steps in their spiritual lives. We gave out these little books by a guy named Andy Stanley, great pastor, great leader at a church down in Georgia. And he wrote this little book, really small book, called How Good is Good Enough? Probably a question we've all asked. How good do I have to be? And we gave those books out and to people who made first-time decisions, but also people just taking spiritual steps. And after every service, I had someone walk up to me and say, I have a friend who, can I have a book? I have a friend who, fill in the blank, can I have a book? Have a friend. And it was amazing because, so many people just engaged in this moment saying, I want to even help my friends take steps so that Jesus would be the subject of their lives. And here's what we know. 5 people let us know that they made those decisions. But I'm sure there's more. People that left here and they were driving home and started having a conversation with God. People that were crawling into bed that Saturday night or Sunday night and said, okay, God, let's do this thing. And Jesus is the subject And we as a church are committed to never allowing that to become a catchphrase. So today we're going to look at a second phrase. It's one of those foundational phrases. And again, Jesus' subject will be number one. And this one, it's right next to it. They are so intertwined. And this phrase is one of those phrases that when you see it actually being lived out, when you see it being displayed, when you see it, you're like, that's it. And when you see it in all of its action and all of its brilliance, when you see it, you're like, that's awesome. But it's also the phrase that when you don't see it being lived out, when you see the opposite phrase from this phrase, it makes your stomach turn. For some of you, you wandered away from church because of this phrase not being lived out. For some of you, your angst in your relationship and your spiritual journey with God is because you constantly see Christians not living this out. And you're like, well, why should I? For some of you, this phrase, when it hasn't been lived out in your life, is what's created so much turmoil in your spiritual journey. But for all of us, when we see it, there's something that happens inside of it. And when we don't see it, we know it. So we're going to jump into the story. It's a story involving Jesus. Why? Because Jesus is the subject. And the story kicks off like this. On one occasion, an expert in the law. Now, this expert in the law, he wasn't a criminal lawyer or a civil lawyer. He was a religious lawyer. He was an expert in the Jewish law. The Jewish law was the first 5 books of the Old Testament. They would call it the Torah. And so he was an expert in the Jewish law. He had all the accolades. He had all the degrees. He had all the credentials. He had a list of people that mentored him. Like when he would talk, people would lean into him because he was so articulate. The expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Now remember, at this point, people were confounded by this guy named Jesus. He came from Nowheresville, and as Jesus taught and would teach more and more, people were leaning in because how he taught and how he engaged, and there was something so different about Jesus. And so some of these experts kept on trying to trip Jesus up. They wanted to discredit Jesus. They wanted to limit his voice. And so this was another one of those moments, and he goes, "Teacher," he asked, and this is what he asked him. "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" That's an age-old question, isn't it? It's a question I'm sure all of us have asked. What must I do to get eternal life? So he asked the question. And he wanted Jesus to answer, and he was hoping that he could trip Jesus up, but Jesus was too good like that, and this is what Jesus does. What is written in the law? How do you read it? See, the expert was trying to put Jesus on the stand, and all of a sudden Jesus just flips it and goes, no, why don't you answer a couple of questions? And the 2 questions, what was written in the law? Remember the law, the first 5 books of the Old Testament is what they call the Torah. And so he was like, hey, what was written in the law? And if you could go back one. And the second one, how do you read it? So how do you interpret it? So both Jesus is asking, how smart are you? And what's your interpretation of what you read? And this is how he responds. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Last week we looked at a story, and the disciples gave the church answer, the Sunday school answer. If you were here last week, we kind of took a moment. We even have those church answers, Sunday school answers today in our modern culture. Usually they use these two words, Jesus and love, and when we put Jesus, love together, usually you can just get any answer in the church world right? We're just like, Jesus loves you, and you can't argue with it. This is what the expert does. He gives, it's the right answer, but it's the churchy answer. You see, he quotes from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5, and verse 4 starts what's called the Shema. And the Shema was this great, it was probably like the most important prayer verse quote that you could give as a person of Jewish faith. And in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4, the Shema starts like this. Hear, and the word hear is actually the word Shema. And the word hear actually doesn't mean just listen to words. It's to hear and put into action, to hear and to activate. And it reads, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. That's verse 4. And verse 5 is, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind. It's the most important verses to people of Jewish faith. And then he attaches a verse found in Leviticus chapter 19, love your neighbor as yourself. And what they think is over the years, they combine these verses together to say, hey, this is the most important. Love God and love your neighbor. Jesus responds, you've answered correctly. Do this and you will live. And it almost feels like the story is going to come to an end, right? It's like, okay, he answered correctly. Good job. But here's the thing. The expert wasn't finished with Jesus. He was still trying to trip him up. He wanted to test him. He wanted to paint him in the corner. He wanted to. But at this point, now the expert's leaning into Jesus because guess what? Jesus is like, yeah, you got it right. But there was something going on within this expert spirit, and he couldn't just let it go. And so he continues. He says, but he wanted to justify himself, and so he's going to ask a question. We'll get to the question in a moment. But he wanted to justify himself, meaning Jesus hit something within him that he didn't like. Jesus positioned his answer to a point where he was like, I'm not sure if I like all of that. And when we get to the question, it will make more sense. But as I started thinking about this moment, he wanted to justify. I thought to myself, man, I'm an expert at justifying. Are you? As I thought about this a lot this week, I'm like, again, I'm sure I'm not the only one. This is what we do. We all sin. Sin is a big churchy Bible word. All sin means is to miss the mark. And wherever you find yourself in your spiritual journey, I think we all get that, all of us do things that aren't right. That's what sin is, doing things that aren't right. We can just sense it. But this is what we do with our sin. We draw a box and we put our sin in here and we recognize it. For instance, if you're talking to someone about someone else, when you cross that line from just having a life-giving, loving conversation about someone to just being very vindictive. Right? But when we do that, it's called gossip in the Bible, by the way, right? That's a sin. And when we talk about other people that aren't there, we know it's kind of wrong, but we kind of draw this box around and we're like, I want the best for this person, so I'm sharing with you so I can pray. So you can join me in prayer. And somewhere along the journey, we just get that, really? There's some darkness going on here. But we draw our box around it, we put it in there, and we're like, I certainly really want to pray for that person as I'm filleting them verbally with words and they're not even around to hear. But this is what happens. When someone does that to us, guess what happens? How dare that person talk about me? I wasn't even there. Do you know what they said about me? I can't believe that. You know what the Bible says, right? And now that becomes huge. I can't believe that. That person, they gossiped about me. When we do it, itty bitty sin. We justify it away. Someone else does it, big sin. Have you ever found yourself going through the Walmart checkout line, the self-checkout line? I love self-checkout. You know, I can just do it myself. And when my girls are with me, it's a little game, who can scan the fastest, and then the machine screams at you because you don't quite put it in the sack the right way. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, it's not quicker, by the way. It's not quicker, right? But have you ever found yourself, you're scanning stuff, you're putting things in bags, you push the cart out of the building, you start to load your car, and all of a sudden you find that one item maybe on the very bottom. What do you do in that moment? Do you go back into the store, try to find a manager, find someone where you can try to convince them that you weren't trying to steal something because you're really honest, you're now back in the store to rescan it? Or do you think to yourself, I didn't mean to steal it. I'm out here now. Next time, maybe I'll say something. I'm just going to throw it in my car. Is that stealing? No. It's Walmart. Multi-billion dollars. They won't know. And your heart wasn't to steal. You didn't go in there going, I'm going to steal toilet paper, right? Like, that wasn't your goal. It's not stealing. But if someone walked in your house and took something from your house and walked out, what would that be? Would you be upset? Yeah. Right? We justify, don't we? We're experts at it. All day long. And that's what this expert was doing. He's like, oh, okay. I'm trying to trap Jesus, but now I'm feeling a little comfortable because I'm not sure where this Jesus guy is going, and this conversation can't come to an end, and I got to follow up with a question because I answered his question, and he said, you got it right, but I'm not sure if I really got it all right, and I want to make sure that we're on the same page. And so he follows up with this question. Who is my neighbor? Oh, that's getting somewhere. Who really is my neighbor? Is it everyone? No, it can't be everyone. Is it the crazy neighbor that lives beside me? Is it the neighbor that every time it snows, he or she decides to plow the driveway and push all the snow in front of my driveway? It can't be everyone. So there has to be a box around neighbor, right? That's what he's doing. There's a box. Let's define neighbor. Because we're not supposed to really love everyone. That's ridiculous. So the story goes on. In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and this is a 17-mile journey from Jerusalem that sat about 2,500 feet above sea level on this mountain top. And any direction, as you left Jerusalem, any direction, you'd be headed down because it set up on this mountaintop. And so from Jerusalem to Jericho is 17 miles. You go from 2,500 feet above sea level to about 800 feet below sea level. So it's a rapid decline. And this road was notorious because it was windy and twisty, and switchbacks and robbers and thieves would hide there, and people just knew that if you're traveling down this road, and so many people had to travel down this road, that it was just a dangerous, dangerous road. and he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now, this is just a moment of just complete transparency, and you can laugh with me or at me. I'm fine with either one, but every time I read this story in the Bible and I come to this point, leaving him half dead, my mind quickly goes to, and I don't know if we have any fans out there, but any Mighty Python fans? Remember that moment where he's like, I'm not dead yet. Yes, you are. No, you're not. Anyone? A few? Yeah, a few? Okay. So if I had a British accent, which I can't do, I would read that part with a British accent, but I can't. But in my mind, I just want you to know what's going on in my mind right now. I'm thinking Mighty Python. So they left him half dead, okay? So the guy's in a bad situation. The story goes on. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed on the other side. So Jesus is going to start laying out kind of this hierarchy type of thought. So he starts with a priest. The priest in the Jewish faith was the kind of the highest. If you had an organization chart, he was the highest person on the org chart. And so he goes, a priest, the highest person to the Jewish faith, was walking down the same road, sees this man half dead, and he goes to the other side of the road and keeps going. Second person comes by. So to a Levite. Now, Levites were kind of the next rung down on the org charts. Levites, their job in the temple was to take care of the temple, to set things up, to take things down, to clean it up, to make sure everything was ready for the priest. So he's working his way down the org chart. So a Levite came down that same road, and when he came to the place and saw this guy who's half dead, he passed by on the other side. And right in this moment, I'm sure that the expert of law, because in the Jewish rabbinic kind of teaching, it always came in threes. There's something about this order and how they would, teach these parables. And so I'm sure he's thinking in his mind, okay, we have the priest and then the Levite, and then there's this third rung. Maybe it's just a good, faithful Jewish husband, right? There's a third person kind of down that org chart that Jesus was going to get to. But Jesus throws a curveball, and he goes this, but a Samaritan. Now, the Samaritans were the most despised group of people to Jews because they were the half-breeds. They weren't fully Jew. They half Jew, and they had been intermarried with other nations, and I mean, to say they hated them is an understatement. They had zero respect for them. They wanted nothing to do with them. I mean, they despised Samaritans. And Jesus goes, a Samaritan came. And when he saw him, he took pity on him. He saw him, and his heart moved into action. He couldn't just pass him by. The question I have for you is this. Who's your Samaritan? Oh, you have one. You can't convince me you don't. You know that person or group of people that when you hear about them, your stomach turns? That person or group of people that when you see it on a Facebook feed, all that stuff wells up inside of you? That person or group of people that when you watch the news and you hear about that person or that group of people and you just have this reaction to them? Think about that person. That's the emotion Jesus is wanting to stir up within us. Who is the Samaritan in your life? Who is a person or a group of people that, I know it's not the churchy thing to say, but we all get it. They don't believe like you believe. They don't have the same moral compass as you. They don't act the same way that you think people should act. They don't live their life like you think they should live their life. There's someone or someones that's a Samaritan in your life. And that's what Jesus is getting to with this expert. Oh, yeah. I know what you think of those people. I know what you say about those people. But when the Samaritan man saw this guy half dead, he took pity on him. Jesus goes on the story. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day, he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. He just didn't use a catchphrase. He moved into action. His pity, his heart that leapt for this guy that was in such a bad condition. He goes, I can do something about this. I can do something. Now, as you think about what he did, there were still some boundaries. And I think that's important, especially as we get closer to really lining into this phrase for us here at Tri-County Church. There are still some boundaries that this man put into place. He just didn't say, hey, for the rest of his life, I'll take care of him. He went on to do his work. He went on with his life for 2 days and then came back. But he wanted to make sure that this guy was taken care of, that he could get back to health. And then Jesus asked this, which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? Oh, the expert was trapped. How else could he answer the question? How else could he position? There was nowhere else he could go. Jesus had walked him into a corner and said, you tell me who the neighbor was. And the expert answers like this: the one who had mercy on him. And Jesus told him, go and do likewise. See, the expert asked the question, who was my neighbor? That was the question, and Jesus never really answered that question, if you think about it. Because Jesus was answering another question, a question that the expert should have asked, but again, he wanted his box. And the who is my neighbor is a box with check boxes in it that you can mark off and say, okay, can I do that or can't I do that? And the real question that Jesus was asking was, what does love look like? That was the question. Another way to put it is, how far should my love extend? You see, that's the real question. Because when you think about to love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself, the real question is, what does love look like? Not who is my neighbor. And you see, the phrase we use here at Tri-County Church, it says it like this: it looks a lot like love. And here's the thing we all get. Again, whether you're a church person, not a church person, Christ follower, not a Christ follower, what we all understand is when we see love in action, we get it. We're like, yeah, that's love. And when you're scrolling through your Facebook feed and someone posts something that you're like, huh? And when it doesn't look like that, how does that make you feel? Because we get it. And Jesus was saying, hey, what does love look like? Did it look like the priest who looked at the man half dead and walked on the other side of the road? Does that look like love? No. Guy's half dead. Did love look like the Levite who saw the man half dead and walked on the other side? Does that look like? No, that doesn't look like love. What does love look like? Seeing the man half dead. And even though there was this massive religious and cultural divide saying, I'm going to help him. I'm going to help him. I'm going to do what I can to help him. You see, when we see this in action, we know it. And when we see this not in action, we know it. And the prayer is this. The prayer is that this, for us, as a church, a group of people, will not become a catchphrase. All week I got so excited about this message, not only because I love this phrase and I knew what story I was going to tell, that got me excited. But what got me really excited was I knew towards the end of the message I was able to celebrate with everyone because, we as a church get Jesus is the subject right. I mean, that there's no question. That's not a catchphrase for us. And the other thing I know is we get this right. This is not a catchphrase for Tri-County Church at all. I mean, early on as I was just getting to know this church, I knew that this church gets this right. Perfect? No. But, we nail the ball when it comes to this one. And I just want to celebrate with all of you. Because we've come through this December Christmas season, and one of the things that we shared throughout the season that there's 2 times a year where people are the most open to come to church, most open to actually accepting the invite, most open to actually consider, walking into a church. Maybe for the first time, maybe it's for the first time in decades, but they're the most open and just blown away by love in action. And so as we looked at all of our campuses and our Christmas Eve attendance, we started compiling all these numbers from this Christmas season, and we looked at just Christmas Eve services, and we compared this past Christmas Eve to the year before, and all 3 of the campuses together, we saw a 17% increase in attendance amongst all of our campuses. And it was just blown away. It represents 296 more people this year at Christmas Eve services than last year. Clearfield and downtown, both of those campuses individually grew up over 30% year to date. And people think multi-site doesn't work. Right? It's amazing. Like we sit there and we're like going, oh. And then we started to get underneath this number. Okay? So I'm going to throw out a bunch of numbers. Some of you will love this. Some of you, your minds will think about unicorns or something. I don't know. I don't even know where unicorns came from. Anyway. Oh, I know. I talked with this little girl last night. She had a unicorn on her shirt. That's where unicorn came from. Okay. So within the 17%, here's some amazing, amazing numbers. Okay. Over 900 of our invite boxes were handed out by you. Love in action. I talked with a guy last night. His name's Pat. I hope you're okay with me sharing this story. But he came up to me after the service. He goes, I just want to share with you, me and my wife, every morning, he walks 3 miles around this loop in Treasure Lake. Just 3 miles every morning. All of his neighbors know, and there's some 28 neighbors, know him, and they kind of see him as a security guard because every morning at 5 a.m., he's out there walking. And you know what he decided to do? They took those invite boxes, they put more stuff in the invite boxes and handed them out to every one of their neighbors as they walked around the 3-mile loop. And then he started to break down 3 very specific stories about what took place as they were handing these boxes out. And I was like, Pat, that looks a lot like love. Over 900. Almost 4,000 individual invite cards were taken from all of our campuses, handed out. We started breaking down web traffic. And get this. And again, remember, I don't think I have to remind all of us of this, but Du Bois is not a suburb of New York City, right? The population density is a little smaller, if you haven't noticed. Okay. This is amazing. We launched Christmas at tcc.com, a website just for Christmas Eve. We had 3,562 unique visitors, unique individuals that came to that website. Amazing. On Facebook, we launched a Christmas invite video, and that video reached 23,006 people, and out of those 23,006 people that one video reached, 7,900 people actually engaged, clicked on it, went either to our website or a Christmas website or another post on Facebook. From December 13th through January 9th on our Tri-County Facebook page, 97,289 people were reached. And out of those 97,289 people reached, 10,753 people, over 10%, actually engaged with the post. This is what this means. Because you walked out of one of our services and said, I'm going to share a Facebook post. I'm going to comment on a Facebook post. I'm going to link to a Facebook post. I'm going to use my social media platform, my relational connection, because I love people that much that I want them to know about what's going on at my church and invite them. 97,000 people were reached. Why? Because you put love into action. And here's the thing. We look at the 17% increase, and, we saw incredible attendance increase. And if you were trying to get on the hill in between the first and second services, again, we overachieved on the reaching, and now we have to overachieve on the traffic flow issue. We're working on it. I hope you know that. Like we've had hours and hours of conversations post-Christmas Eve. We're working on it so we can solve that issue. And please know, we are absolutely committed to solving that issue. Why? Because we don't want that to become the reason people don't come and get to know who Jesus is. Like, we can do something about that. And there's not a lot of, as you can tell, there's not a lot of good options here on the hill, but we're going to figure it out. But here's the purpose with all these numbers. Because again, if you're a numbers person, you love numbers. Like, you want more numbers. If you're a numbers person, you're hoping I put on pie charts and graphs and Excel sheets, and you're like, yes. If you're not a numbers person right now, your brain is like, I just don't care, Chris. I mean, that's great. Give me a warm and fuzzy story. But here's what I hope you all know, why I share these numbers. And we got a few more. Every number has a name. I hope you realize that. That's why I broke 17% down to 296 people. More than last year. Every number has a name. Every name has a story. And every story matters to God. I mean, that's why, when you think 97,000 people were reached on Facebook on some level, because why? You love people. You didn't have to share. You didn't have to comment. You didn't have to like. You didn't have to post. You didn't have to take boxes. You didn't have to make a 3-mile loop and say, I can hand these boxes to every one of my neighbors. You didn't have to do, but because you realize that Jesus is the subject, you want to put love into action, you did. And guess what happens? There are countless stories. Many of them we will never fully know. Why? Because it looks a lot like love. This December, we launched our My Story Giving campaign. And from all of our campuses, you all generously gave $80,801.56. Yeah! And again, like, that's an amazing number. Like, it's like, yes, but here's what we have to wrap our arms around. The first $25,000, is going to Kasangati. This village in Uganda. I mean, real lives, real kids, real families, a real community. Why? Because you chose to give generously. And we're like, bam, it's gone. It's to them. It's helping them now. This isn't like, one day maybe we... No. We're helping them. The next $25,000 is already positioned for local community benevolence. Within all of our campuses, helping meet real needs of people. We've had long conversations this week. We're going to have more long conversations moving into the coming weeks. How can we do even that process better? Because we just don't want to hand out money. We want to hand out money, meet real needs, but also partner with people in their spiritual journey. We want to do both. And so we're already talking, how can we do that better? Something to celebrate. It looks a lot like love. Our Next Gen ministry came up with this idea, and they took these scars and they wrote a bunch of handwritten notes, and they all said something different. This one says, I'm not lost, meaning the scarf's not lost. If you need me, put me on. Tri-County Next Gen Youth Girls. And they went around the local community, and they hung those in random places, hoping that someone just might need that. That looks a lot like love. This last week I went in to get my hair cut because I was getting shaggy. And so I went in and I knew this gal, went to Tri-County Church. And so before I went in, I just kind of, researched her on the web. I just wanted to get to know her a little bit. I'm going to be standing there for 45 minutes. I'm like, I just want to know who she is and what she likes and have a conversation. And I came across this article in the Courier Express. It was posted somewhere in December. And so I messaged Buffy and I said, hey, can I share this story with everyone? And she said, please. See, Buffy went on a mission trip to Dominican, and she tells a story. You can, if you just Google Buffy Courier Express, you'll find the story. And she went on this mission trip to Dominican. And she tells a story where one night they're walking along, they see a homeless guy, they just pass the homeless guy, they don't stop, they don't talk to him, they don't ask him if he needs, they pass him. And she goes, we got past him, and all of a sudden I realized, why didn't we do anything? We could have done something to that guy. We could have helped that guy. And she goes, we went in the store, we bought a bunch of food and necessities, and we came back, and he was gone. And she goes, it just wrecked me, because we missed an opportunity. And so the next night they were still in Dominican, they were doing their devotions, and someone came in and said, hey, there's another homeless guy laying outside. And she goes, we got food. We bought food for the other homeless guy. We missed that opportunity, but we can do something now. So they went outside and they gave this guy some food, and she finds out he's 19, and he was so weak from not having food, he could barely eat himself, but they helped him and they met his needs, and it wrecked her. So she came back to the States going, there's something we can do here. I mean, it was great that we helped there, but what can we do here? And she linked up with an organization in Pittsburgh called Living Ministries Monthly Street Outreach. And what they do is they fill backpacks with necessities, food and other life needs. And they walk around, find people in needs, and hand them backpacks and develop a life conversation with that person. And she goes, it's something I can do. So she starts telling people, hey, this is a great opportunity. We can meet people's needs. She messaged me late Friday night, and she goes, hey, I want to share with you another part of the story. She goes, I just want to tell you something really cool. On Saturday, we had our salon Christmas party. And every year, the girls all pitch in to buy something for Brooks, that's her husband, and me. This year, they bought an Amazon gift card with a large amount of money to make up more backpacks. They also all wanted to pick a Saturday to volunteer to do the homeless outreach, and then lean into what she says. I'm so excited how contagious his love is, and now they want to put it into action. You see, when people see love in action, it is contagious. It's contagious. And the prayer is this. This isn't a Tri-County initiative. I mean, it is. It's a really cool phrase. But this is for all of us to live out. So this week, as you move throughout your week, how do you keep this? It looks a lot like love from becoming this, a catchphrase. Put love into action and watch how contagious it really is. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you for our time. Oh, I celebrate because this church gets it. This church gets it. This group of people really get it. Lord, I thank you for people like Buffy. I thank you for the countless people that put love into action by handing out invite boxes and invite cards and sharing on Facebook. Lord, I thank you for the people that gave so generously so that we can help people around the world and here locally. Lord, I thank you that this church really is committed to putting love into action. Why? Because you are the subject. In your name I pray. Amen.